All right, welcome back everybody to conversation number 58 with the TLC. We're welcoming back longtime member and good friend, Mr. Matt Gershoff. He's going to be talking to us today about going a little bit beyond A/B testing, rethinking tools for customer insight and action. And now's my chance to embarrass Matt. So for those of you who have been presenters many times, you know that I always ask you to send over a little blurb to help me introduce you and a little description. And some of you are better at doing that than others. Matt was really bad this time, and this is what happens when you do that. So I get to embarrass you. So Matt is a big picture thinker with an even bigger heart and more humility and a sincere desire to help others than just about anyone I know. He will swear he's not a stats expert nor a data scientist. In fact, if you try to get him to admit to any expertise, he'll deny it. Trust me, you want to learn from him. In the nearly 6 years I've had the privilege now of long conversations with Matt, I've learned more, laughed more, and grown more, both personally and professionally, than I can ever say. So welcome back to the TLC. It's been too damn long. Your turn.
Thanks, Kelly. That was really sweet of you to say that. I appreciate that. That's very kind. Now I'm humbled. Not embarrassed, humbled. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I appreciate it. I know it's Friday. It's Friday morning for me. And so I imagine it's Friday morning for most of us here. So thanks for coming early. At the end of the week, hopefully this will help glide you into the weekend as opposed to being a final barrier to being able to relax. Let's see. I'm going to start. Should I start the show?
Yes, sir.
Let's see if I can do this. Oddly, a bit of a Luddite when it comes to these things. All right, do we all see a dog?
We do. Hi, Franklin.
Franklin, yeah, Franklin to make an appearance. I figure got to break it up with some Franklin. Franklin's my dog. And so actually, that there's actually, this is almost like a talk kind of in two parts. I happen to think that the main one is really this idea of one way of thinking about analytics, which might be a little bit differently than we normally think about it, is just kind of thinking of analytics as advocacy, customer advocacy. And that's going to be the first bit. And then we'll talk about how we might want to expand our reach from just, I'm coming normally from like an experimentation in TLC. I think most folks are coming from an experimentation, and that has a certain sort of culture and cadence and set of ways of thinking about things. But sort of our friends over in the research side maybe think about things a little bit differently, ask different types of questions and get a different view. And so the hope of this talk was kind of to bring those things together, both conceptually and to motivate them, and then also to like start thinking about how we might want to blend the tools together so that ultimately we can act as advocates for our clients and for our customers. And I will just a shout out to Paula Sapington. She gave a talk with here from Hilton, and it kind of inspired me to do this. So I want to give her some credit. And actually I stole a couple of her slides, so hopefully I'll do them justice. I'm coming from Conductrics. You can think of it as a sort of a customer experience platform. So we include A/B testing, multi-arm bandits targeting, and surveys now, market research. And this talk is really why we extended, we spent the resources and the time to add those capabilities. And so whether or not it's us or somebody else, I do think that this is like green field for everybody to kind of start thinking about. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us all collectively to start helping our customers in a little bit better way. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? just analytics is customer advocacy. That's going to be kind of the main, I think the main takeaway. So if you want to leave now, you've got it, basically thinking of analytics rather than as sort of a factory to produce reports and whatnot. It's really to be sort of the front line for your customer. Goodhart's Law, we're going to talk briefly about big and small NPS. We'll talk a little bit about surveys at a very quick high level, briefly about experimental versus non-experimental survey design, some of the instruments that we might want to use, and then we'll talk about blending experimentation with market research. Again, all of this at a quick high level, but just so that we can kind of get a survey, as you were, of the lay of the land. Briefly about responder bias, that's going to be something that's going to be quite important to think about. And then a survey, I'm calling them survey ratio mismatch checks. I'm sure Ronnie will ping in for other ways of looking at it, and just kind of ways of just ensuring that we understand how we're collecting the data so that we can make the best inference from it. And then just very quickly about using customer feedback and survey data to forward and to customize the user experience based upon how they've responded. So rather than just ask them a question and then say thanks, which doesn't really give the customer feedback that you've been listening to them at all, to actually sort of respond in a way that's conditioned or pertinent to how they've responded back to you. So make them know that you're not just dumping it somewhere, not listening to them. Make it clear that you're listening to how they're responding. Okay, I think it's important maybe to give some of my biases, so you know where I'm coming from. And so maybe I have some of my own incentives to see things in a certain way. So one, I am the co-founder of a company. So, you know, obviously I have a certain perspective and point of view. So just keep that in mind. I happen to think analytics inference is actually hard. And no technology isn't going to, if you haven't, you know, if you don't put the work in, you haven't really thought about the problem well, you haven't defined a problem particularly well, it's not going to really help you. So I don't think inference is a technology, and I think unfortunately it's often treated such, and so I just, that is one of my biases. Could be wrong, but just that's how I see it. I think it's important to understand underlying abstractions of things. I think it's important to use the simplest thing possible to solve a problem. I think complexity is costly, and so don't pick something because it's more complex. You should actually not pick it if it's more complex, if it's not providing additional value. I think most technical decisions are second order issues. I think the main thing again is problem definition, thinking about your customer, having a good model of your customer, and having good editorial about what types of experiences might improve the customer experience. And so the main takeaway also is that I think the value of experimentation sort of writ large is that it helps us be intentional in our decision making and have empathy for our customers. Okay, I really think it's not about scale. It's not about all the other stuff. It's really about a framework for helping us be intentional and have empathy. And I think those are the two main principles. At least that's my bias about how we all can be successful. Okay, so what's the goal? So want to just briefly talk about Goodhart's Law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Okay, so there's lots of examples about this in the world, but I'm going to use Franklin. And so when Franklin was young, I used to live in New York City, and when he was a puppy, he came down into the laundry room with me. And imagine like what you would imagine like a laundry room in a New York City apartment building is. Nasty. Anyway, he popped over to me and he had something in his mouth, and it was a box of rat poison. Fortunately, there was nothing in it. I totally freaked out. And so even though I'm a terrible disciplinarian, the one thing that I got him to learn is to drop it. So whenever he dropped something, if he wasn't supposed to have it, I would give him a treat. The problem is that he now kind of has gamed that. And after dinner, almost every single night, he'll leave the living room and then come back with something that he knows he's not supposed to have. And he makes a little bit of a show for us to see him so that we can say, drop it. And then he drops it and then he gets a treat. So the key point is that sometimes, so here he is here.
comes to how much money left to actually get out and experience the city.
Okay, so this happens all the time, and so the problem is that he's been conditioned now actually to do the wrong thing. Okay, so it's the one thing we don't want to do is I don't want to say
Patience. His internet will come right back. I guarantee it. This happened the other day. You're back.
okay. Okay, so you just let me know if you're having any issues. I'm not sure what. So seeing trees from the forest. So a couple of, I think, good heart goals in experimentation is test count. So this sometimes people like obsess about, and they point to certain organizations that do thousands of tests per week or per month or per year, what have you. And then they think that, oh, well, if we just have lots of tests, then we're being successful. So I think that's a mistake. All of these things can be good. They can be good behavior. But only if it's in the service of something, like as only if you're being intentional about things. So advanced stats and ML, or this is like, Bayesian versus frequentist, all of these things, in of themselves don't provide value. They only provide value when they're solving a particular type of problem. Modern stacks, all these things that people kind of talk about, like you need to be doing these things. And of course you really don't need to be doing them unless you do. So just kind of emulating what you think a successful organization or one thinks a successful organization is doing, that is not going to get you anywhere, I don't think. Okay, so what is the true objective, I think, of analytics and experimentation? It's really to enrich customers' lives. And I got this idea from this guy when I was doing some research. This is Frederick Reichheld, who's from Bain, and he came up with the NPS survey. And before this, I was a little bit, I don't know, skeptical of NPS, and a little bit, I think, dismissive, and maybe to a certain degree about some of the tactical side of things, perhaps. But he has this really interesting idea of the whole point, his idea of big NPS, is that the primary purpose of organizations is to enrich the lives of the customers. And I thought that was really great. Like, that's a great way to reframe and refocus work that we tend to do. It tends to be about us. Like, even when we talk about conversion rates, that's like us trying to get someone else to do something. The conversion is like we're trying to convert them. And I like this way of framing it, which is more about how is it that we make our customers' lives better off? Like, is what we're doing actually improving their lives or their experience? And so I really kind of got converted myself to this idea of big NPS, even if his idea of small NPS, which is just asking that question, the NPS question, maybe is not something that is always of great value. But anyway, to think, the idea is to think of analytics less as a report and experiment factory and more as a front line for the company to listen to customers and be their advocate to senior executive about what needs to change. And this is just me paraphrasing him. I think this is like a key takeaway, really, of the talk, is to rethink about the experimentation team, again, as less as a process about pushing out experiments and more as a way of one additional way to listen to the customer, observe the customer, to help act as their advocate. And I think that's just a much more powerful imagery and a way of thinking of ourselves is to be advocates rather than, just producing experiments or reporting. Okay, so what is NPS? The small NPS is, and this is how he refers to it, is an instrument you might use to measure how you might be enriching customers' experience. And you usually do this via survey. It's a simple question. How likely are you to recommend to a friend or colleague? Not at all likely, extremely likely on a scale from 0 to 10. And it's not just, you know, it's even companies that are technically, you might think of like sort of tech focused or product focused, really they themselves think of themselves, or at least they publicly think of themselves or call themselves as being customer focused. And so this is even Amazon, which we normally point to as being something that's all about the technology, is really, they see themselves, or at least Bezos, is his objective is to be the most customer centric. And this idea of keeping the customer focused when we do all of our work, I think is something that we can also point to successful companies as doing. So it's not just the technology, but it's the fact that they are customer focused. This is a quote that I really love from Danny Meyer. Danny Meyer runs, or used to run, the Union Square Hospitality Group. So like, used to have restaurants like Union Square Cafe, Tavern, you know, high-end restaurants in New York City. And then he expanded to Shake Shack. But this is a great quote, which is the service, and I think this is what we focus on often, is the technical delivery of a product, right? So it's like, how do we deliver our product or service? And that's really us focused in a way. And I think, you know, this is where we spend a lot of our time thinking. It's like, how do we deliver our website or our experience or our products to our customers? But hospitality is how that delivery makes its recipients feel. And so I love that, this idea of not just, you know, the minimum is the technical delivery of the product, but this other way of thinking about it is this idea of hospitality, which is about ensuring that the experience is making the customer feel a certain way. And so it might be useful to understand how these experiences are making the customer feel, not just how they're behaving. So a few guiding principles that we use here, and this helps me think about experimentation and what experiments to run. And the value of it is to be intentional. And by intentional, just to take actions with awareness, deliberately, voluntarily, with conscious purpose, not to be cavalier, not to do it just because we see somebody else doing it, but to be conscious about it. And so I believe that experimentation helps us to be intentional. Like, the whole value of it, I think, is about providing a framework and a process to help force us think intentionally. And by intentional, I mean, by when we run experiments, we make things explicit. Okay, so we have to explicitly say what our choices are. We have to explicitly say what the objective is. So what's the purpose of doing this, right? And then what are our options? What are our choice sets? And then we also are estimating the value of the thing. So the point of running the experiment is to, one, frame the problem. So that's the design of the experiment. That's the upfront phase, which I think people try to often think of as sort of a drag as a cost, but I think a lot of that thinking is really where the value is, because you're being forced to think through and be very clear about why you might be doing something. And then when we get our results back, it helps us think at the margin and about the marginal benefits and the marginal trade-offs, right? What's the cost benefit of doing A versus B or versus C? So we both have had to frame and think through very clearly about what our options are. We've had to articulate upfront what we think the objectives are going to be, or what we want the objectives are going to be. And then we're going to get some data back or information about evaluating the relative trade-offs. This is about being intentional. And I think that's the main value of experimentation. And then this idea of having empathy. And the empathy is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from their perspective. Okay, so again, this is moving from like thinking about conversion rates, which is about from our perspective, and to kind of start thinking about, and so if we're thinking about our customers, it's capacity to understand or feel what our customers are experiencing from their perspective. And I think most of analytics historically in experimentation has been constrained to observe behaviors. So all we've been doing, I don't want to say all, but we've been constrained to just observing, we do something, we kind of poke at the environment, and then we kind of just watch and see what people do. And this often is limited to shorter term transactional behaviors. Again, it's like, did they buy? Did they not buy? It's much harder to get insights on how our interventions or how our experiences for our customers are making them feel. But how we might want to know how they feel. How is this experience? How are they interpreting it? And the way to do that, or at least one way, is to ask them. And so I think, given our culture, experimentation culture, which tends to be quite technical, I do feel like maybe there's often resistance to this as being maybe softer, maybe more error prone, and perhaps it is, but I do think it's extremely valuable. So how are we going to ask? Well, we might ask using surveys instrument. So what is a survey? Well, we're going to measure variables of interest, and it's just using questionnaires or interviews and to get them to directly report on their thoughts and feelings. So these are things that we can't normally get with our normal experimentation tools, which is really based upon behavior. So this is one way to get their internal thinking about their feelings and why they're doing things. And then just like experimentation, it's collected using random samples. Otherwise, it would be a census. So we're just doing a survey of people. That's just what a survey is. And normally surveys are non-experimental, right? So there's no additional intervention. There's no, independent variable. There's no causal variable that we're trying to check and see whether or not the survey results differ by. So you might do some analysis within the survey. So a subset of people, and there may be some sort of conditional logic on who gets into the survey. Maybe we're just going to survey people on the weekend, or we're going to survey people who come to this page, what have you. And we're going to get various measures, and we might do some analysis within that survey, like see how different measures or different responses are correlated with one another. But we haven't had some sort of external intervention. Conversely, you can have an experimental design with surveys, and that's what we're going to talk about a bit. And I think there's going to be a lot of value there, caveats, obviously. And that's where we're going to have some sort of manipulation of an independent variable, and that's our regular A/B test in our parlance. And we're going to see if it affects customer feedback. So it's the same thing as running a survey, but we're going to have this addition of bringing the tools that we're familiar with from A/B testing alongside survey research, market research. Kelly, can you still hear me? I'm getting some feedback.
Yes.
Okay. So what are a few questions or instruments that we might want to ask? I'm just going to go through this very quickly. I'm not advocating really for any of these, but just to give you a flavor. And then I'll let my presentation will be public. I'll pass it out if anyone wants it. And then you can review these in more detail. But like NPS, for those who aren't familiar, is a question: how likely are you to recommend the TLC to a friend or colleague? The theory behind this is that it's getting at ideas of loyalty. So if you're willing to recommend a good or service or a company to somebody else, then it's very likely that you're an advocate. And so it ranges from 0 to 10. Not at all likely means they're not going to be loyal at all. It's extremely likely. And the way it works is a little funky. But if you score from 0 to 6, you're considered a detractor. That's bad. 7 and 8, you're passive, not great, but not a detractor. And then 9 and 10s is what you want, is the promoters. Those are folks who are going to be your advocates. And then the calculation is the percent of promoter, essentially the percent of promoters minus the percent of detractors. So it's going to be between minus 100 and 100 score. Ronnie, who I think is on the call, has just recently, it's kind of part of maybe this is just part of the zeitgeist. This is starting to come out from independent areas, but he has a little paper that he just published, I think, on LinkedIn.
He just shared the link in the calls channel.
Okay, great. And then I'll get it from Ronnie and I'll just add it here. I just have a working doc that he has. Anyway, so this is kind of, people are thinking about this now in more detail. And my sense is that this is going to be table stakes going forward. And I do think that just this idea of linking NPS to experimentation, not even NPS, it can also just be customer effort score. So maybe you're doing something like product, you have a new product or you have a new flow, and you want to get some idea of whether or not it's making it more or less difficult for the customer. So for example, we have a client who uses Conductrics to test back-end search engine algorithms. But that can be a little bit tricky because they're a media company, and how do you know whether or not one search engine algorithm is returning better results than another? It could be engagement. So how many articles does the customer read after their search results? So because maybe you're getting more relevant content back to them, but it might mean actually more engagement might be a bad thing because maybe they're still really searching for what they actually want. And so in that type of case, it might be great to ask this type of question from folks and know which search engine algorithm they had and know whether or not it was easier or harder for them to get the content they wanted, right? So this kind of opens up questions that may have been more ambiguous to determine by directly asking them to get the feedback. Well, actually, how hard was it? I'm not going to go into how it's calculated. And then there's customer satisfaction score. They're all very, very similar. There's some, I'll leave it to you to go and do some additional research, but there's some research, not surprisingly, by the CES folks who say that their thing is better. But I'm not really advocating for any one of these. And you can customize and use your own. You can ask any metric question that you'd like. Okay, but there's no free lunch here, not surprisingly. And there's a couple things that you want to be aware of when you're running surveys, research, and I'm sure there's a lot of other ones. And so happy to, after this chat, to open this up. There's instrument error, and then there's responder bias. Are two main issues with self-reported data. So instrument error. So this is the Mars Climate Orbiter, and I have a picture of this because this thing, I don't know how, I think it was over $1 billion or something, but the problem is one supplier was using metrics, and one was the European unit of measure for doing their calculations, and another supplier was using American units of measure. And so this was off by an order of magnitude when it was skimming the surface of Mars, and it crashed. And that's an instrument error. So it was just the instrument was thinking that it was measuring one thing, but really the way it was calibrated, it was measuring something else. And so it crashed. So this can happen not just in surveys, it's like instrument error. So it's like you've asked the question has been asked poorly. So what are good instruments? They're ones that have clear instructions, they're unambiguous. So questions should have the same meaning for everyone, right? So everyone should interpret it basically the same way. Things should be grouped logically. So things that they shouldn't be in like weird orders. So when people are like going through the responses, if you're going from higher to low, they should be in that logical order. Should be visually appealing, so it's not confusing. So there should be low cognitive load when someone is evaluating and trying to interpret the survey. Because remember, you're asking them to do something, so you should make it as easy as possible for them. And related to that should be just obvious how to submit and record the responses. So everything should be clean. So design is important here. And then there's responder bias. I think most people have seen this. The areas where the bullet holes, this is from World War II. Abraham Wald was a Hungarian statistician. He came to the United States. And so kind of came up with this idea of responder bias. And really what the issue is that our survivorship bias is that the areas where there aren't bullet holes is where obviously the plane is weakest. These are planes came back from after fighting, and they found these patterns of, and I'm not sure if this is apocryphal. They had these patterns of bullet holes. And so at first glance, it looks like you need to shore up where the bullet holes are, but actually you need to shore up where there aren't the bullet holes, because the planes that took bullets in these parts where there aren't the bullet holes are the ones that crashed. Okay, so upward bias. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. So if you have upward bias, and that means like that'll happen if your happy customers are more likely to respond. So if you're surveying people and people are really annoyed with you or unhappy, they're like, I'm not going to bother filling out this survey, I'm out of here. Then your results are going to have are not going to be representative of everyone who's used your website or your experience, and you're going to have higher scores. And the converse is true. If really what you have is only people who are miserable respond, then you're going to have a downward bias on your results. But we can use this. So we're gonna kind of try to, even though this is possible, this can happen. We're going to try to see if we can still get some value out of it. So for example, upward bias, the NPS is 95. Downward, if only it's people who are unhappy respond, you might have an NPS of 35 in the NPS case, but really the average NPS is 65. So how people respond is going to matter, and it's going to affect the results. I don't know. I was going to ask what this is, but this is the corpus callosum. And so this is a body within the brain which connects the left and right hemispheres. And so I really like this image of this interaction, or this bringing together ideas from experimentation and market research as the importance of the corpus callosum, which is that we're able to harmonize both sort of left and right brain thinking. And I got this idea of right and left brain from Paula Sapington, and she has some nice slides where sort of we, from experimentation and from A/B testing world, think of things are maybe more left brain, think sort of analytically, think in terms of, I don't want to say analytically, think numerically, statistical significance, sort of the marginal value of information, these types of ways of thinking. And perhaps folks in research and UX research think maybe more right brain, sort of think verbally, and maybe less about what is working, but they're really trying to get at why something is working. And it's really about trying to better understand. So I see this as sort of the empathy side. So maybe over on the left, we're maybe more on about helping us think intentionally and thinking about the marginal trade-offs with our decisions. And maybe on the right-hand side here, it's more of this empathy and kind of understanding why someone is doing something, so that we can improve things for them. And so I think together, there's a lot of value to bringing both these ways of thinking to be more long-term and have more of a relationship approach, as opposed to transactional approach, which we tend to have with experimentation programs. So customer experience, and a positive is really this interaction of these three main capabilities. So this ability to observe, which we're using with experimentation, to listen, which is survey, and then to act, right? So we want to blend together this capacity for both observational, maybe think of this sort of first-party data versus zero-party data, with the survey, but then also to kind of shorten the time between the insights from these, both experimentation and survey, to actually act on it in session. So the overlap, experimentation and survey, I think, is extremely powerful. And this is kind of a question that Ronnie was getting at in his paper. And then it's not just that, though, it's also this ability to act and customize the experience, based upon how someone's responded. That helps let them know that you're listening. I don't just quite understand when you ask someone for their feedback and then just respond, thanks. When you have a conversation and you ask someone, hey, could you give me some advice about this? And then you just say thanks, and you don't do it, or you don't respond that you've acknowledged that the advice you've given them. It's kind of, you lose the opportunity to strengthen a relationship there, because someone, when someone does something for you, in a way, that's like an opportunity for them to, you almost, in a way, if you take advantage of what they're telling you, you're in a way letting them do you a favor. And that's its own type of favor. right? To allow someone to do something for you. And so if you don't acknowledge it, it comes across as you don't care. Or I think it comes across as you don't really care about what they're saying. Okay, so I think there's emergent capabilities when we have this overlap, and I think historically experimentation and targeting, that's been something that we've been doing in the space for some time. I think that's really the contextual bandit, multi-arm bandit, is that overlap between targeting, personalization, and experimentation. But I think there's these new emergent capabilities, which is the overlap between experimentation and survey, which is experiments that are more based upon trying to get at loyalty as opposed to transactional behavior. And then the overlap between personalization and survey is customization based upon direct customer feedback. So personalization or targeting based upon, I guess, zero party data, right? So you're gonna provide an experience that is relevant or pertinent based upon what someone has just told you, as opposed to inferring it. So it's really more about explicit responses as opposed to historically what we've been working on, which has been implicit. Okay, so let's just get into some detail here. A/B test to survey. So here we create an A/B test on the left, and then I've also created a survey, and then I'm going to just link it. So basically, you can think of it, at least the way we do it, almost like the survey is a publisher, and then any A/B test can subscribe to the survey. So this survey is asking a few questions. It's asking an NPS question. Maybe the purpose of your visit, or, what's your title, and maybe some feedback, open source feedback. And I might want to evaluate the NPS question based upon the research, the message testing that I'm doing in my A/B test. But there's going to be some issues there, which is, the first, what one might think is that, in the survey data, so we have survey data, so we're capturing the survey data, and the survey data can capture what A/B test a user was in before they got to the survey, responded to the survey, and what intervention they got, what experience they got. And at first glance, that seems like that's enough, but that really probably is not going to be enough, because like on the left-hand side, we have our test data, and on the right-hand side, we have our survey data. And if we just look at the survey data with it appended, we have the test data appended to the survey data, there's actually missing data here, okay? And what's missing is we don't have everyone who entered the test who wasn't offered the survey. So that's invisible to us. And this is similar to the walled issue of the survivorship bias. And also, we don't know who was offered the test, who's offered the survey, but didn't respond. So if we just look at the survey data with the test data appended to it, we have the missing data problem. And that's an issue because we have potential confounding. So this is, people talk about sample ratio mismatch. That's really an issue of a way of trying to detect if there's confounding. And by confounding, talk about that here, is that what we don't want, the purpose of running an A/B test is to block this confounding issue, okay? So normally we have a treatment and we want to evaluate the treatment on some outcome, right? So we have some endpoint and we want to know whether or not experience A or experience B is performing better. But in order to do that, we have to ensure that the subject, the user, the customer, has no part to play in how they get assigned the treatment. And that's why we do random sampling. And so an example of this, or more early example, actually this was using instrumental variables, was David Card, and this ability of trying to evaluate whether or not education led to more earnings. Like, do you have more education? If you have more education, do you make more money? But the problem is that there's this unobserved confounder of ability. And it may very well be that people who have just more natural ability are also the ones who are more likely to get more education. And so they're also the ones maybe who have more earnings. And so really what we want to do is block ability from entering into education, or we want to block these unobserved confounders from entering into both the endpoint as well as the treatment. Okay, and that's why we use random selection. That's the whole point of doing random experiments, is to block this confounder issue. So this is useful to know. That's why we're doing A/B testing. So the problem here is that we have our A/B test now. This is a little bit different. And then it's possible, though, that the A/B test is going to affect A, who gets the survey, and then also B, whether or not the person responds or not. So we have to do some checks. And so one of the ways to do that, at least the way we do that, is we construct these system goals of, we know whoever got an A/B test, whether or not they were offered this survey that the test is linked to, and whether or not they responded if they were offered. So this is very similar to doing the sample ratio mismatch check. We want to check to see if people were offered in the same ratio who got A and B versus people who responded in the same ratio. So what does that look like? So just quickly go through this here. Okay, so here we have, when you use when you link a survey to a test, and you could do this if you were collecting this data. This is the type of data you would need to have, however it's done in your system. If you cobble it together, this is just how we do it, is that we create special goals, which is whether or not someone was offered. So if someone enters into an A/B test, there's the regular behavioral goal. They get binary goals, whether or not they were a detractor or a passive or a promoter. We get the normal NPS score. And then there's also whether or not they were offered and whether or not they submitted, right? Whether they were a responder or not. And we need these two bits of information to deal with the potential confounding. So here's some data that we get back. This is just demo data. So equal number of visitors in the A/B test looks roughly equal the number who are offered, and of those who are offered looks roughly equal submitted, but we want to check that. And so there's a few ways to do this, and we also throw a little alert if it isn't, so you can check. But one way is just fairly simple, is a chi-square test of independence. And basically the way this test works is we just want to see is the number of people who are offered the survey for A and B consistent with what we would expect, this expected number of offers, based upon how many people who got A and B. So the way this works, I'll just go through this quickly, and this will be in the notes, is that you can go through, and for every combination of test, so if I have here, I have A and a B, but if I had a C, we'd have two more rows here. We have offered and not offered, and then we have the observed. So we have 96 people were offered an A/B test who got A, and 101 were not. Conversely, 98 were offered for B, 99 were not. Then we can calculate the number who we would have expected based upon the 50-50 split of people who are in A and B. And then you go through and calculate the difference, the square difference. I won't go through this all here. And you get the chi-squared statistic, and then you can calculate a p-value. And then so you can have some checks to see whether or not it looks like people are being offered the survey at the same rate as they've been offered the A and the B. If not, if these were way different, then there might be some sort of interaction between, it could be the case where people got the B message, and maybe that's such a terrible message that they just leave the site and they never, and if the survey takes place down the funnel, the people who got B never even get the chance to get offered. That's the type of thing you want to check. And you could also do this as a pairwise test as well. Better probably to do the chi-square, especially if you have multiple options. A, B, C, and D is probably a more robust way to do it. But you could also just do it as a pairwise test if you just had to. And you would do the same type of thing for surveys, for submits. So you want to check to see whether or not of those who are offered A and B, does it look like people are submitting at the same rate or not, right? Because if you have this responder bias, there's a good chance if it's a poor experience, you might have more people responding under the poor experience. Okay. But that actually can be useful because it's like, let's say you have the same scores for A and B, and you have, let's say you were using NPS, they're both terrible, but way more people responded for B. Now that's not guaranteed evidence, but that is indicative that the B experience was worse because they both have equally bad scores. But if you have twice as many people who have been responding to the B experience, that might mean that actually we've pushed the information of the low score into the response rate. And so really the response rate is indicative of whether or not B is worse than A. Okay. And let me just wrap this up. You can also link surveys to targeting. I think this is going to be something that's going to be very powerful as we move forward, especially with cookie issues. This is a simple example. So if you might ask an NPS flavored question, but maybe if they're going to give me a low score, I might want to have a follow-up question, acknowledging the fact that we didn't meet their expectations and maybe trying to get information from them about how we could do better. Or conversely, if they had a high score, we might want to acknowledge that and then see if there's anything else they wanted to add. And in addition, one can actually target the content based upon how you respond to sort of qualitative questions. So you can do any types of targeting. And I think whether you're using our tool or using other tools, I do think that this is a way of expanding the reach of the experimentation team to one, kind of message up into the organization by adding survey data with the experimentations, with various experiments, so that, again, there's these different types of people respond to different information. You have both the analytics as well as maybe direct quotes from customers to support one experience. Or one reason to make a change versus just showing them the statistical significance, which might really mean nothing to them. Okay, that's me. Happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. All right, everybody. You may have noticed that you've gotten a slew of invites. So as you're thinking through questions, remember you can put them on the calls channel. You can take yourself off mute and ask questions, but also let me know you can message me in the Zoom or the chat if you don't have the upcoming invites. They're coming through about every 2 weeks right now. So any questions for Mr. Gershoff? Hi, Ronnie.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Lucas, are you
I'm
going
driving,
first or
so
you
I
want me to
can't-
go first?
Oh, what a shot. What a
I have a
shot.
real quick one.
Luke, it's Lucas and Ronnie. What a surprise.
The usual
Both of
suspects,
them
huh?
are chiming in.
I promise we're not ganging up on you, Matt.
Okay,
I may-
I'll go first since
I take the challenge.
Yeah, you go.
Take the challenge. Bring it.
so I wrote this document I put in the Slack channel. It was basically a follow-up to a question I got in my class. How useful is NPS? And my conclusion was, wow, given the high variability, given the fact that this is not even an average, but this, strange, not very well motivated adding up of these detractors minus the promoters, the variance is so high, you're going to need a lot of surveys to get any sort of statistical significance. Otherwise, you end up looking at noise. And I think when I look at some of the NPS reports out there and the number of responders that they have, they're looking at noise. Yet you seem to be supporting this, and I'm actually a little surprised, right? Because you have the right statistical background for this. So help me reconcile that.
Yeah, well, so the point of the really why I spoke about NPS is one, that's something that organizations value, like within the organization. I personally, I have no real dog in it. I don't, whether they use NPS, you can use whatever you want, but that is a standard that's out there. The point was really to talk about big NPS and the fact that we're really, I really like this idea of being the advocate for the customers and reframing the role of experimentation.
Yeah,
From
so Matt, I agree on the big NPS, but that's
Yeah.
like saying we should
No.
optimize for long-term customer lifetime value, right? It's easy to say that, it's hard to operationalize it. So,
Yeah,
somebody
right.
like Fred can say, I'm optimizing for, some fuzzy amorphous concept, which everybody loves. But then is the little NPS a manifestation of that? I don't believe so.
That's fine. I'm not going to argue about the efficacy of little NPS. It's more like if that's something of value in your
But
organization.
didn't you tell me that you just implemented this in Conductrix so you invested effort to build this capability of little NPS?
It's a survey and you can set it up however you want to measure.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, whether you use NPS or CS or any arbitrary metric response, it doesn't matter to us. I was just using it. I just use NPS as an example. But actually, I do disagree with you. I do think as sort of a guardrail, using it to see whether or not in certain use cases it's making something worse, I think is valuable. So we can go into a separate call, like how much, because in Ronnie's paper. And actually, I want to spend a lot of time talking about the details of Ronnie's paper, but if you had a larger treatment effect, then you wouldn't need that much data. Actually, you kind of just picked 5%, but that's arbitrary. And then secondly, I would say,
well, when you say it's arbitrary, no, it's based on data that we rarely see treatment effects of over 5%, right?
Exactly. And I would say that the second point is that this is actually informative to help the organization interpret NPS better, because we do give you confidence intervals. And I do think it's important to get confidence intervals around NPS. And so then you can say, oh, actually, maybe we shouldn't be freaking out by some small change time over time. But at any rate, if you don't like NPS, that's fine. I mean, I don't.
I'm trying to understand why you like NPS. It's different, right?
I actually don't like or not like NPS. Like you can ask any question. You could ask a CES question. You could ask any metric response.
I know, but you're not concerned with the fact that 12% of people on average respond, and you have this missing response problem. I think that to me kills the reliability of many of these surveys, especially as in the last couple of years they started to be used a lot, and we all suffer from the survey fatigue.
Well, I mean, look, if you don't like using, how about this? I'll write up something in response.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Lucas.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in a car. I might have missed this because I'm driving, but you mentioned this this idea of survey SRM, but wouldn't it be simpler to just look at conversion to survey and just treat that as a normal statistical test, like comparing conversion to survey for A versus B?
What do you mean by conversion to survey?
So you have visitors in A, visitors in B, and then people take the survey in A and people take the survey in B. That is just a basic conversion rate, right?
Yeah, well, it's two things. One, it's you first have to see who's getting offered. So it's not just that. So you have people, you have an A/B test, let's say, or multiple A/B tests, and you want to know, one, you want to check to see in each treatment how many folks got offered, like if the rate of being offered is what you would expect, right? So let's say 50 people, 50 get A and B, right? And so that's fine. And then you want to check, you want to get about 50% survey response in each. Yeah. So that is like a binary metric. So one binary metric is, were they offered? Yeah. And then secondly, if they were offered, did they respond? But the denominator isn't on the number of people in A and B. The denominator for response is going to be offered. That's
right.
And that's what we do.
So
yeah, but if you did, that's what you need to do too. It's like hierarchical. There's two levels. Yeah. First, you want to check offer, and then conditioned on offer, you want to check response. So that's exactly correct. Yeah, so you could look at it just as a conversion rate. That's what I showed two ways of doing it. you could do that. That's exactly how, if you wanted to look in our reporting, you could do it that way. But we also check, I think it makes more sense though to check, especially if you have 3 or more possible options in the test, you might want to do like an omnibus test and just check overall, what's the distribution of response rate? Is that consistent with the expected number of responders? That'd be a cleaner way
Right.
to do it.
But you need that additional piece of information of what is the expected rate, right?
Well, you
Whereas
estimate that. No, that's easily estimated.
All right, guys, we got to wrap it up. We're at the top of the hour. Y'all
Chat
can
after.
continue the conversation over in the TLC calls.
I can just one last thing. I love the concept of the analytics team as the sort of advocating for the customer. I love that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as always, thank you, everybody. Thank you, TLCers. See you in 2 weeks. Florent is going to join us, and he's going to talk about causal inference about humans, which will be a great conversation. And then 2 weeks after that, join us as we welcome back Ton Vestling. He's going to share his talk from Super Week about looking for more A/B test winners. So see everybody in 2 weeks. Thanks all. Thanks again,
Thank
Matt.
you.
Bye
Thank
all.
you.